So today I came to start, and yesterday I finished everything on the radiator. I put everything together, put it all together, and finally actually got a cap and put that on, and tightened everything, put all of the pipes on. And when I closed the bonnet, I see that the radiator cap touches on the bonnet. It's like about 25 millimeters too high. So, I've taken this thing in and out about 4 times now trying to fit it. To be honest, I just feel like leaving right now and just leaving this, because it's just, the stuff just goes on and on and on. And anyway, so now I must take this whole thing apart and redo this and lower the radiator so that it fits. Before we have a look to see how I created this radiator fitting problem and how I solved it, let's have a look at how I sorted out the fuel system with a correct accelerator linkage and restored the fuel tank. This was another set of problems, one after another. When doing a rebuild, you need to anticipate having problems. But when you include an engine conversion on top of a rebuild, you need to multiply those problems by a factor of 100. And it's exactly what I'm dealing with. So much so that I'm going to make a special video just on how to convert a Series 1 from a 2-litre engine to a 2.25-litre engine, with all the tips and tricks I've learned. Let me know in the comments below if this would be useful, or if you have any tips to share. I consulted the manual to see what accelerator linkage I needed for the 2.25. I have the original accelerator linkage for this vehicle, but it doesn't work because the carburetor sits on the left-hand side of the engine for the 2.25 engine, and not the right-hand side like on the original 2-litre engine. So off I went to Lima's to find a used linkage system. That wasn't too difficult, and I came home with all the necessary parts. After cleaning everything up, I was ready to get it fitted. But that's when I discovered the next problem. It took me a while to figure this out, and the confusion was real. Even trying to explain it on this video, I kept getting myself confused. That's actually, when they look the same. If you put this one like that, way, and it operates the opposite way. So it's the more complicated part is the carburetor linkage, which is different for a Solex and the Weber Zenith carburetors. The bracket is the same, but the carburetor bell crank assembly, as it's called in the manual, is different. There are 2 types, one that pulls down and another that pulls up. You need to make sure that you have the right one for your carburetor type. The earlier Solex pulls up, while the later Weber and Zenith carburetors pull down. Initially I had the earlier mechanism that pulled up, but I needed the later one that pulls down for the Zenith carb. So I had to go and find the correct linkage with the spring operating in the opposite direction. So this one operates in the way that it moves up. So when it pulls up like this. It goes up, and then this one works the other way and it pulls down, so the motion is that way around, which is the right one for this. So yeah, so they look identical, but they're just a little bit different. So if you're converting between those 2 different carburetor types and you want to have exactly the right linkage, then these are the linkages that you need. This one for the earlier one and this one for the later one. The fuel tank looked in pretty good condition, as it was protected sitting under the seat box with the cab roof on. So I was quite optimistic to get it restored. When I removed the level sensor, it was bent and the float was missing. I opened the top up and saw that it was a very simple device and everything looked good inside. So I cleaned it up and decided to give it a test. Using the actual fuel gauge and power from the battery, the result was good. It seemed to accurately show empty and full. So I have decided to reuse it after refitting a float from a carburetor. I cleaned the petrol tank on the outside with a metal brush to remove the rust and cleaned the inside with sand and soapy water mixture. The inside didn't look too bad with just a little bit of surface rust and no visible damage. So I cleaned and dried everything and then painted the outside with a primer and a quick dry enamel top coat. Then I refitted it. At this point I realized that I had not tested it for leaks. I briefly thought I'd just leave it and take a chance, but luckily I was sensible enough to remove it and test it for leaks, because there were some leaks. So I took it off to a radiator shop to repair the leaks and recoat the inside of the tank. They did an okay job fixing it, but unfortunately changed the base plate, which made refitting a bit more difficult. But in the end I got it back and everything seems fine, or at least I hope it's fine. The last piece of the fuel system was to make up some new fuel lines. I had sourced all the fittings, so I just had to refit them onto some new plastic tubing, which I had. Using a heat gun, I managed to soften the plastic enough to get the metal fittings on, and then once it cooled, there was a nice solid and tight fit. So, I've taken this thing in and out about 4 times now trying to fit it. And for some reason I didn't use the cap in the meantime. And I was so busy looking at the height on the carburetor, I didn't focus on the radiator, and I thought that would be fine. And anyway, so now I must take this whole thing apart and redo this and lower the radiator so that it fits. Now, back to that radiator dilemma that I had created for myself. Instead of bending the original radiator panel to fit the Series 3 radiator, I had decided to use 3 brackets to make the 2 fit. They consisted of 2 angles for the vertical sides, which were fine, and a flat piece for the top. It was the flat piece for the top that was the problem, because the radiator mounting points could not sit flush with the front panel. This is the most obvious way to fit it, but with hindsight is obviously not correct, because the top of the radiator then sits above the front panel, which clearly is going to be a problem. So the solution was to fit a 25mm square tube as a spacer to lower the radiator by 25mm. This also improved the position of the radiator, as the fan now sat more towards the middle. Something that I'd done earlier was to make some special supporting brackets for the radiator to hold it up, and this is what I explained here. I made some supporting brackets for the radiator because this is a Series 3 radiator, and it's just hanging on this radiator mount or radiator grill, which is aluminium, so not very strong, and all that weight pulling on this does cause some fatigue here. So what I've done is I've manufactured just some brackets that I'm going to be putting at the bottom on the chassis, just to hold the radiator up and straight, also so that it doesn't wobble backwards and forth, because this whole thing is quite flimsy. So I'm just putting these on now. In the end, it was a waste of time, but wasn't such a big problem to fix. And it was a big relief when everything was finally fitted and correct.